Um,
Hi,
blah.
and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers Journal of the Vaccine Year. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Wednesday, May 26th, and I'm very pleased to welcome back to the program H.D. Palmer, speaking to us from Sacramento, Deputy Director of the California Department of Finance. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Jerry. Great to be back on Newsmakers.
Well, you were here on Newsmakers, as you recall, I'm sure very well, last May 20th, 2020, and you were poor mouthing us about the state. We had a $54 billion shortfall, sustained revenue losses, deficits as far as the eye could see, cats and dogs living together, all of that stuff. And now I understand we got a $56 billion surplus. That's quite a turnaround. What happened?
Yeah, it's a pretty good swing. You've got it about right. And I don't know about the cat, but yeah, things are definitely different. Yeah, at the point when last we talked a year ago, we were in the throes of the pandemic. It was spreading substantially across the state and across the country and across the globe, for that matter. And we were still seeing just a dramatic shedding of jobs. We lost about 2.7 million jobs in California in March and April of last year. And for our forecasters here at the Department of Finance, for the legislative analysts and others outside, we didn't know where the bottom was. We had no idea how long or how far this was going to go. We had no idea what the prospects were at that time for a vaccine. And it was uncertain how long this pandemic was going to go and the recession that came with it. So our best estimates at the time was a budget gap of about, as you say, $54 billion. And we took a lot of very difficult decisions with cutting programs, suspending others, and foregoing a lot of previously planned spending from the January budget of last year in order to be able to close that gap. Now, what happened and how did things get better? Probably three ways to describe that. First of all is the stock market did a lot better than we had projected or other forecasters had as well, inside and outside of government. The second thing is the economic recovery did better in the second half of calendar year 2020 than we had projected. And the third thing that's related to that is that more of the individuals in California in the higher end sectors of the economy were able to make the switch or the pivot, if you will, to a working remotely or work from home environment than a lot of the folks at the other end of the wage scale where there's a lot more in-person activity, and that really took the brunt of the job losses during the recession. And those high income earners are the ones who tend to provide more of the personal income tax in California. Roughly 1% of the tax returns in the state of California generate at least 45% of all the personal income tax that's paid in the state.
All right,
So, but that sliver of taxpayers was able to weather this period better than we had projected back 12 months ago.
yeah.
Today.
All right, let me stop you and just back up a little bit just to break some of this down. So basically, the rich got richer, but there's three, as I understand it, there's three basic revenue sources for state government: the income tax, the sales tax, and the corporations tax.
Yep.
So specifically, which of those three really exceeded, not only exceeded, but astonished the forecasters on that?
First and foremost, personal income tax, which roughly is 2/3 of all of the general fund revenue that we take in. And things such as capital gains and stock options are taxed as personal income in California. So when the markets are doing well, that narrow sliver of taxpayers that pays roughly 45% of all of the personal income tax in California does pretty well, and the state does pretty well. And that's been the case here. We also strengthened sales tax because a lot of folks were doing a lot of purchasing and for goods around the house. They weren't spending it on going places or doing things outdoors because that wasn't the possibility. But in a lot of like the home supply, building supply areas, we saw a lot of growth there. But principally it was personal income tax growth, which is our largest share of revenue. And a lot of that was fueled by the market doing better than we had projected, by individuals at the higher end of the wage sector doing better than we had projected.
Yeah. And so the total budget is what now? 260, 278,
It-
something like that?
In that neighborhood, much larger than when you and I first got into this racket.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. But that doesn't include the $27 billion in new federal money that is on the way, correct?
that we are programming in our budget, the we're getting from the American Rescue Plan, as well as money that was approved by Congress in late December. That those federal dollars are not counted as part of what the state identifies as its budget surplus. That's separate and apart from that. And in terms of what that is contributing to the additional resources that we have compared to January, that's about 27 billion dollars. And so those are areas where we are programming a lot of that to with the efforts that we're doing in the state, even before the revised budget that came out a couple of weeks ago, to try to target a lot of that one-time surge in revenues that we've been seeing in recent months, starting back in January and running up until the revised budget a couple of weeks ago, and trying to direct those dollars into areas where we think we can provide direct assistance to individuals and to small businesses who've really borne the brunt of the economic damage of this recession.
Yeah. Okay. So are we still in a recession? Are we emerging from a recession? How do you characterize it?
We're definitely on the way back, but we're not to where we were before the pandemic started. We lost, as I said, about 2.7 million jobs in just 2 months alone in February and March of last year. We've gained back about 40% of those jobs, and it'll probably we're on track to recover those pre-pandemic job levels a lot faster than we were projecting back in January. That said, it's not just a matter, in the governor's view, of getting back to that numeric job number where we would before, because one of the things we knew before going into the pandemic was there was a significant wage gap in the state between low income and upper income individuals. And that was really displayed dramatically by the impact of the recession, where those low jobs really, where there was a lot of in-person activity, such as in the entertainment and hospitality industries, really took the lion's share of the job losses as opposed to those at the higher end. And so it is a matter of getting back to where we were before, but it's also a matter in the governor's view of how do we make it a more inclusive recovery and try to bring everybody along in terms of coming back.
All right, let's talk about that a little bit. I know you are nothing if not scrupulously unpolitical, but the rest of us have been treated to the spectacle of the governor flying around the state and talking about California roaring back. And, you know, it's variously, let's see, our friend George Skelton described it as Christmas in May. The New York Times said it was the equivalent of that time everyone on Oprah got a Pontiac. And some of his political enemies in the recall said he's bribing taxpayers with their own money. But in any case, he is putting this budget out there, calling it historic and transformational and other things. Where's the money going? Where's the new money going?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the direct areas where we are providing money back directly to individuals and businesses is through what the governor has called the Golden State Stimulus Program. And that has provided $600 one-time payments first in March, starting in March of this year, to those individuals who were at the lowest end of the wage scale in California, by which we define it as being eligible for the state's only earned income tax credit, which means you have got to earn less than $30,000 a year. So we started with direct payments to those individuals. And clearly those individuals are the ones where that money made an immediate difference in terms of being able to pay the rent, being able to keep the lights on, being able to provide food and keep it in the fridge and in the cupboards. That in terms of being able to provide about—
That's a one-time payment, correct?
Correct. It's a one-time payment of $600, separate and apart from the federal payments. What the governor has proposed in terms of his revised budget is to provide a similar $600 one-time payment to individuals or couples whose incomes, adjusted gross incomes, go up to $75,000. More of the roughly middle class, if you will, Californians who did not have the more lower income Californians did during the recession, but still have been feeling the effects of it because they may have been able to put a lot of their expenses and run up their credit cards to be able to cover their needs in the short term, as well as to provide payments to those individuals who really contribute to our state's economy in the undocumented area, but who are ineligible for the federal payments because of their citizenship status.
So
They
that,
too
is
will
that
be receiving $600 one-time payments as well.
and then related to that, as I understand it, uh, people who are undocumented and 60 or over are going to become eligible for Medicaid for public health.
Right. Separate and apart from the one-time payments, one of the things that the governor has proposed in his revised budget is to expand coverage for undocumented individuals to bring them onto Medi-Cal, the program, which currently provides healthcare to roughly 1 out of every 3 Californians, which we think is a smart thing to do. It will be a longer-term program, but when you look at the costs of providing healthcare for those individuals and compare that to what the other costs of getting healthcare in a more expensive and less financially correct environment of, say, the emergency rooms, it makes more sense to do it this way, we believe. And it's along with what the governor has done in terms of expansion of healthcare to provide more coverage to more Californians.
And what about the universal pre-K? Talk about that a little bit.
It's one of the areas where we believe that we can make a difference. One in terms of expanding into basically another additional grade. It's important for childhood learning, obviously, but one of the things that's also been made clear, not only for transitional kids, so in the area of childcare, where the governor is proposing to add another 100,000 slots, is that there's been a really big trade-off that's been clear in this pandemic in between the ability to have your child in school or in reliable childcare and being able to go back to work. A lot of women, a lot of parents in this state had to make a really tough choice during this. Were they able to keep their job, or do they have to stay home because they didn't have childcare, somebody to watch the kids when they were on Zoom, or they didn't have the resources to bring somebody in and take care of their kids when they were going to be able to go to work. So this is part of, not only from an educational standpoint, but also from a productivity standpoint of the workforce and an equity standpoint, to be able to provide more resources so we can have those young Californians in and learning in a safe environment.
All right. What are some of the other big ticket items? The new spending.
Those would probably be some of the bigger ones where there's significant investments in infrastructure that we're going to be proposing using some of those federal dollars. Another area where we are programming a lot of those one-time monies is to provide, in the near term, to provide more grants to small businesses in the state to be able to help them keep the doors open and hopefully bring back some of the people who they may have had to let go, or be able to just stay here and expand. And so we had a lot of success in doing that earlier this year. We've got pent-up demand for grant applications. So we were able to take some more of the resources that we've had in the budget that we didn't have in January and expand on that program, where we already added $2 billion in early action in the legislature to provide that type of direct assistance. And I think it's important when we're talking about the budget and we're talking about spending and what are we doing with these resources, is that we recognize that a lot of what we are seeing in terms of this recent surge in revenues isn't likely going to be coming in at this clip forever. And so we're very careful in terms of how we're targeting it, we believe, in terms of using it for immediate one-time needs that are addressing the issues about helping the economy and individuals get back, versus committing it to high levels of spending. That's one of the things that happened back 20 years ago when we were in the middle of the dot-com boom, when revenues were riding the rocket and everybody thought things were going to be going fine. And the legislature at that time decided they were going to commit the state to higher ongoing levels of spending. And when the dot-com boom went spectacularly bust and those one-time revenues evaporated virtually overnight, there was still a higher ongoing level of spending that couldn't be sustained. systemic budget gaps that really weren't closed until Governor Brown came back for his second tour of duty as governor, and we were able to close that up. We don't want to make that same mistake twice with this current surge in revenue that we're seeing now, which is why if you look at the new spending that's outside of education, roughly 90% of the new spending we've earmarked for one-time things, such as those payments to individuals, such as those grant payments to small businesses. So we don't come to spending that can't be sustained 3, 4, 5 years from now.
All right, let me ask a couple of follow-ups on that, because the period you reference by sheer coincidence was shortly before Governor Davis was recalled, and we now have another recall going on. But the Medi-Cal coverage for immigrants 60 and over is a permanent
Yep.
feature, as is the universal PreK, correct?
Correct.
And
we
also
think that
the number one area where state revenue goes to is public schools, and now that's being boosted to what, $14,000 per pupil, if I got that number right?
There's roughly 38 cents out of every dollar of new general fund revenue is committed under the Constitution to K through 12 schools and community colleges. As it grows under the Constitution, basically becomes a floor for that. So the Constitution declares how much money has to go to education. It doesn't mandate or stipulate how you spend it on those programs. And one of the areas where Governor Newsom believes we need to dedicate those resources is at the front end by having greater resources available for transitional kindergarten, and also at the same time to be able to provide the resources to help get classroom full-time this fall, so that we can go back to whatever you might want to consider normal in terms of not having such a heavy reliance on remote learning. But yeah, there is a decision made in very targeted areas to say, yeah, we are going to do more ongoing spending in certain areas. Somewhat similar to what Governor Brown did when we had the option to go into what was called the optional expansion under the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, could opt to provide more coverage under their Medicaid or Medi-Cal programs, in our case, under that, and they would receive a federal subsidy to bring more people in. And that federal subsidy over a number of years gradually declined. So eyes wide open going in, Governor Brown and the legislature said, we're going to do that. We know we're committing ourselves to long-term costs, but we know that in doing it in the area of healthcare, if we're able to provide, healthcare under this method, is people not getting care or going to the emergency rooms for care, it's smarter care, it's better care, and it's less expensive care. That's kind of the way that you can view what the governor is doing here in terms of covering this new group of undocumented individuals through Medi-Cal.
Right, but to back up to where we started the conversation, I mean, the forecasts were like completely wrong, and not surprisingly, given on the volatility of the tax system that we have, with the personal income tax being of a small number of people being so crucial. So it seems to me there is some danger to be investing in these new, I won't call them entitlements, but ongoing spending when we've just seen such a dramatic example of that.
Yeah, a couple of points on that, and those are absolutely valid points. One is what I mentioned a moment ago, is that when you're looking at this current surge in revenue that we're having, we're committing only 10% of every new dollar of that money into ongoing programs. The balance is on one-time spending for those areas where we think it's targeted to help individuals and businesses recover. The second thing is the budget reserves. This budget has a combined budget reserve of about $24.4 billion. That's a record amount of money that is set aside that can't be used for check overdraft, as it were. There are very tight rules under the Constitution that goes into what's called the budget stabilization account, or the rainy day fund, which isn't your traditional reserve, that can only be taken out if a governor declares a fiscal emergency and the legislature approves it. So it's not easy to make withdrawals out of that. The other thing regarding the growth in revenues and how long that's going to go is that when the voters passed Proposition 2 a couple of years ago and set up the new rules of the road, if you will, on how that rainy day fund is going to be financed, it said that not only are you going to take a flat percentage of revenues off the top and put it into this fund, it said a percentage of revenues on top of that that you can identify as being generated from market activity, things like capital gains or stock options, is taken off of the top on top of that base amount of revenues, and it's put away into that rainy day fund, which again is a lot tougher to access than other areas. That has the ability to do two things. One, build up your reserves, and two, it acts as a little bit of a buffer to the volatility of the market, so that when you're running in a very good market environment like we have been in the last 9 to 12 months, a share of those good times are automatically raked off the top and not available and put away for a time when we have an economic downturn like we saw last year.
Yeah. And then, of course, the legislative analyst, who is the most trustworthy person, according to our friend Skelton again, in the world on the budget, it was critical in several different areas. One was just sort of an overall thing. You're going too fast. Why don't you take a minute and breathe and think about where this is going? The second thing was the analyst noted there's $12 billion of internal borrowing that's still going on here. So, and then the other question I have, and I don't want to go all wonky on it, but we all fondly remember Proposition 4, the GAN initiative that followed Proposition 13, which said there would be rebates to taxpayers after, when revenues accumulated to a certain level. And these are not really rebates. They're more like stimulus payments, because the people who are mostly paying the taxes aren't getting anything out of that. So could you just—
Right. And most of the people who are paying the taxes and providing that relief didn't have a foreclosure notice, weren't threatened to have their utility shut off, and didn't have to go to a food bank or a food pantry. And I think most people would look at that and say, yes, we believe that a portion of those revenues that we've gained from market activity that have come from that higher end of the income earners in California on a one-time basis ought to be directed to those living on the edge because of this recession.
So socialism, basically. Okay, I got it. On that.
No, it's called economic recovery, and being able to provide people with a one-time payment to be able to do things like keep the rent paid and keep the lights on.
Yeah, no, and what about the ledge analyst's criticism about, don't be throwing all these dollars out the window so fast, recommending to the legislature that they be somewhat more prudent, which is the first time those two words have ever been in the same sentence before.
Yeah. A couple of things. One, we've got a lot of immediate needs that we believe are important to address, such as the payments to those who have been hit the worst by the recession, and to help our small businesses recover from an unprecedented economic recession that didn't just hit particular sectors of California's economy, but hit everybody just about in terms of the closure orders and the stay-at-home orders. We think we've balanced that with a plan that sets aside, again, as we were talking about a minute ago, more than $24 billion in combined reserves in the event of an economic downturn, which we think is a pretty prudent insurance policy. We're going to have talks with the legislature. If they want to pull back on some spending and put more money in reserves, we'll see what proposals they have to come forward with that in the next 2 weeks. The legislature's deadline to act on a budget is June the 15th under the Constitution. We're coming up on Memorial Day, so in track and field terms, we'll be coming into the bell lap, if you will, of budget discussions with the legislature. We've put out our program. The governor's laid out what he thinks is a balanced approach that deals with the immediate needs of the state in terms of economic recovery, at the same time looking forward and saying, how do we need to poise ourselves so we've got a recovery that is not only bringing us back to where we were before the pandemic, but also is more inclusive in terms of bringing more people along with it than just that narrow group at the top. And we'll see where the legislature wants to go with it. There's always going to be push and pull and debate with the legislature, and in the end product is going to look a little different than what the governor proposes in January and again in May. And we'll see where that process takes us over the next couple of weeks.
All right. So the most important issue that I hear, just in terms of newsmakers, viewers, is about the schools reopening. Explain what, if anything, is in his budget proposal to ensure that schools reopen.
Well, there's already money even before the new budget that the legislature passed that provided billions of dollars to school districts to be able to provide the kinds of resources to reopen schools safely, whether it's PPE, whether it's cleaning, whether it's issues involving social distancing. Resources are there, were provided earlier on. We're providing even more in this budget, several billion dollars more, to be able to give the schools all of the resources that they need to be able to open safely in the fall in accordance with CDC guidelines. So we don't think, in terms of having either the financial resources or the ability to reopen, money's not going to be an object because of what was already appropriated prior to the budget and what we've got in the budget now. And we made it very clear that that's the reopening full-time in person is going to be the rule rather than the exception. There are going to be, and there have been, cases where parents are going to have a desire to have remote learning. That existed before the pandemic, that'll still exist now. But it's very clear that in terms of for the benefit of students and for the benefit of parents, we into an in-person full-time environment in our schools, and this budget is designed and predicated on doing just that.
But is there a requirement that that be the case? You know, one of the governor's biggest allies, of course, is the CTA, the Teachers Association, and there's been in various areas pushback about that, you know, not wanting to go back. Does the budget require the schools to be open?
It basically says there are going to be penalties involved in terms of money that would be withheld if you don't return into an in-person full-time environment come this fall.
All right, let me real quick, two quick political questions. I mean, there's obviously no way to, in people's minds, to separate all this money flowing from the recall, and all right-thinking people who read CalBuzz know the recall is going to fail anyway. But be that as it may, how do you avoid the clear appearance and perception that this is, you know, this spending is somehow related to the recall?
The recall had nothing to do with the pandemic. That hit everybody. It wasn't a partisan pandemic. It affected everybody in the state. It affected jobs. It affected revenues, and it is unprecedented. We've gone through economic downturns and recessions before, but never before have we seen entire swaths of this economy in California shut down and people told you cannot go out. Unprecedented effect on jobs in the economy in the state, and we're just now beginning to come back. We are coming back in a pretty robust manner, but we're still not back to where we were before. And so one of the things that the governor was doing before this revised budget came out and in January was to say, we know we've got a surge in revenue right now. We know we've got people who are hurting at the lower end of the income scale. There are things we can do to provide direct short-term to these individuals and to small businesses that are going to help us stay afloat until the economy can catch up and we can start growing again. And so the governor makes no apologies for committing some of those one-time resources from a good market to being directed to those individuals who needed the help the most.
All right, real quick. In Washington, of course, one of the arguments was, you know, all this money that the Democrats want to send out is a bailout for blue states. And now, you know, you see the McConnell argument has some traction because here's $27 billion coming from the feds that really isn't needed. I mean, let's be blunt. How do you answer that argument?
There are, you know, the state went in and didn't wait for the federal government to provide funding. We came out in January with a proposal that said, we're not going to wait. We do have state needs, and we've been funding a lot of the things that happened during the pandemic in 2020. The state fronted a lot of that money. Now we are eventually, we think, going to be reimbursed by the federal government for some of the costs we fronted. But to say that, you know, we're taking this money and spending it frivolously is just ridiculous. We've had, you know, in the fifth largest economy in the world is what California's gross state product represents. And when you lose or over 2 billion, or excuse me, 2 million jobs in just in an economy that provides the US economy with a significant amount of its growth. It's important not just to California, but to the nation as a whole to be able to get our economy up and running again. We primed that pump. We jump-started that process by using state dollars to do that. We are going to use additional federal dollars to advance that and to make sure that, as we said earlier, that this recovery isn't just a status quo ante recovery, that we get back to numeric jobs. We are dealing with some of the areas where we can affect individuals at the lower income sector of the economy and help, bring them back up to being, full partners in a recovery, along with those individuals who fortunately have been able to weather this recession better than others.
All right. Let's leave it there. H.D. Palmer, Deputy Finance Director for the state of California. Thank you so much for your time as always. And hopefully we'll get full attendance at the Giants back pretty soon, and we'll be able to see you there. Thanks for taking the time.
I'll buy the garlic fries. Great seeing you, Jerry.
All right, brother.